Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday podcast. Hope everyone's had a great week. I do apologize. We ended up not being able to have our Tuesday podcast. We had a lot of technical problems that day, so we skipped that one, which we don't like doing, and that's the first one we've actually done that with, and hopefully it'll be the last time. But I did want to go over some things that I think are pretty interesting today and get everybody's reaction to it. One of the things that I stay really closely attuned to and what's been in a lot of the real estate news, probably if you're not in the industry, you probably are not aware of these things. But I thought you as consumers would find this interesting and you should be aware of them. And that's called the Clear Cooperation Policy. Well, what does that mean? Well, about 5 or 6 years ago, the governing body of the real estate industry, the NAR, the National Association of Realtors, they're kind of like, for lack of a better comparison, like a large union. So if you want to use the realtor designation and call yourself a realtor, and if you want to have access to the multiple listing service, which is the large database that realtors can refer to see every house that's for sale basically in their market. You, of course, have to belong to the NAR and your local MLS. So they set policies that the realtors have to follow. And for those of you that heard during the summer when we started our podcast and we went over all the changes in the real estate business and how it affected operating procedures, fees, that the Justice Department stuck their neck in. And if you remember hearing me, I explained these changes, but I also said I didn't think they were warranted, but it ended up a lot of money changed hands from the NAR to the plaintiffs of a class action lawsuit. And really the only people that made money were the lawyers. And of course, the NAR had to have a settlement of $462 million, which is quite sizable. And that settlement did leave out some of the really large real estate entities that had to settle and negotiate on their own these things. So it was pretty involved, and it's changed how we do business somewhat. I won't bore you with that today, but that's leading into the Clear Cooperation. So this policy was passed by the NAR, I believe, in 2019. So what basically Clear Cooperation is, and I'll read it exactly as it is, and then I'll explain to you exactly the intent of it and what it means from a practical point of view. NAR Policy 8.0 states, within 1 business day of marketing a property to the public, the listing broker must submit the listing to the MLS for cooperation with other MLS participants. Public marketing includes, but is not limited to, flyers displayed in windows, yard signs, digital marketing on public-facing websites, brokerage website displays including IDX and VOW, digital communications marketing, email blast, multi-brokerage listing sharing networks, and applications available to the general public. So what does that actually mean after I read you all the legal jargon, and what's the practical application of that for consumers? Well, basically, the NAR determined that in order to give consumers the most opportunities to buy and sell real estate, and to give all the real estate agents a level playing field, that when a customer hired a realtor or a broker, that realtor or broker, once they had a signed agreement with their customer, had to put it in the multiple listing database within 1 business day of any marketing that would take place. So meaning, let's say I went on social media and I posted a lot of information about a brand new listing that I just received. Like in my case, you heard during my last show, I had mentioned a listing that we had in Hunters Creek in the Keaton's Crest section. So once those type of things are marketed to the general public, within one business day, they have to go into the multiple listing database where all the agents who have a realtor designation would have access to look up information about that property, and if they had an interested party, to schedule an appointment and show that property to their customer. And if their customer was interested in pursuing that property, then of course that agent would write up an offer on it. Well, you might say, well, yeah, that's what should be done. Well, what was happening before that, and what some people are trying to get to happen again, especially a select few of the larger brokerages, they wanted somebody to hire them to sell a property, but they didn't want to expose it to the general public or the other realtors. They wanted to do it on kind of a more limited basis that the real estate company could select exactly how they were going to market it. Kind of internal marketing. They might put it on a private website, or they might do other things, but they wouldn't place it in the MLS. So what does that mean, and what do the practical applications mean? Well, that means that in all likelihood, that listing is going to get far less activity than if it was put in the MLS, because the MLS in the Central Florida, Orlando area, we have over 10,000 practicing agents. Well, if it didn't go on the MLS and it was just marketed by the listing company, they obviously have far less agents. So even if they were a big company, let's say, maybe a big branch might have 100 agents, 150 agents if they were a large entity. And those would be the only ones that really would have access to that property. So it just stands to reason that if you were a seller, would you rather have 10,000 agents trying to show your home or 150 agents? Well, the argument has been from these companies that wanted to limit the access, that a lot of customers would choose that option because they wanted to retain their privacy. In other words, for whatever reasons, they didn't want the general public to know they were selling their property, and they wanted to have limited access, and they didn't want to have people continuously viewing the property. And so these companies that are for this to revoke the clear policy, they're saying, oh yeah, people just don't want the headache of all these people traipsing in, or they don't want people to know about selling their house, etc. Well, that's probably true in a very, very limited sampling. You know, it's probably true if you were a celebrity. You wouldn't want everybody to know that you're selling your property, because obviously you have to be more careful about who's in and out of your house. Or maybe if you're a multi-millionaire and you've got a $5 or $10 million property, you might want to limit access to the property. So there's selective people in that category, but they're few and far between. Now, there is a method in Orlando that we can do, that if a person in that situation wants to limit access, they can sign a waiver saying they don't want it to go in the MLS. But the difference is, if they sign that waiver, then A, the realtor has to explain to them what they're signing and how they're limiting themselves. And B, that realtor is limited on doing advertising because you have that 1-day rule. So I've done that a handful of times in my career, but I would say 99% of my sellers want to go in the MLS. I can confidently say, based on my experience, that you're going to get far more activity through the MLS. And in most cases, the house is going to sell quicker and for a higher price. It just stands to reason, the more people that look at the house, the more people that have access to the house, there's going to be more competition for the house. And especially in a strong market, you're going to have multiple offers, hopefully, and you're going to drive the price up. Whereas if it's limited to the listing company, those dynamics are not going to take place. Now, these companies that are pushing to revoke clear cooperation, they're going to tell you that one of the things that they do is they can put it in an internal website and they can just market it to a select few customers that they have. And because it's not universally viewed, they could possibly put it up at a higher price because people will have less access to do comparison shopping. And that, let's say they put it in the internal website for a couple weeks and it doesn't get much of any activity, then they can put it in the regular multiple listing with a wide exposure. They're going to say that the plus of doing that is, let's say they had the house on the market in an internal website for 15 days. It was unsuccessful. So then they put it in the MLS. Well, then they would have had a trial balloon. So they're going to say to the consumer, well, we know that we probably priced it too high, so now we need to lower the price. And also when it goes in the MLS, it'll appear as if it's a brand new listing, and nobody will know that they had that limited exposure in their own website. Those things all sound good on the surface, but if you actually dig beneath the surface, I just don't happen to agree with them. They'll try to say that this clear cooperation stifles creativity, but I don't believe that either, because you can be as creative as you want to as long as it's in the MLS and what you're doing is not illegal. I think the main reason for doing it is twofold. I think that these larger entities, because they have a big, what they call an economies of scale, and if they have multiple outlets, they have a fair amount of agents, and they want to dominate. It's just like, Walmart tries to dominate smaller retail entities, and it's obviously harder for smaller retail entities to compete with Walmart. By the same token, these larger conglomerates in real estate would be harder to compete with the more advantages that they're given because they have theoretically more resources and more name exposure. But I think the bottom line is the reason they do this is for commission greed. They want to limit who shows the property. Consequently, if the listing company shows and sells the property, they're going to get a higher commission. And a lot of their economic models are going to show that, well, if it's in the MLS, the listing company maybe only has the buyer for the property 10 to 15% of the time. Whereas if we don't put it in the MLS, and the property happens to sell, then we're going to be the procuring cause in most of the sales. So consequently, they're going to make more money doing that is their logic. And I think, everybody wants to make money and everybody wants to make the largest commissions. But the point of policies and not limiting competition is that it should be good for the consumer, not for the real estate entity. So I personally have put a lot of time and effort into evaluating this. And not that I'm old-fashioned by any means. I feel that creativity, hard work, marketing, and business acumen should be rewarded. But I don't feel you should be given an advantage over the competition. If you think about all the things you hear about in a political election, and this happens every election cycle, regardless of whether you're Republican, Democrat, regardless of which candidate you're for in a particular election, you always hear, we've got to help out small businesses. Both parties say that continuously, and they'll blame the other party for stifling innovation, having a lot of regulatory stuff that makes it hard for small businesses to compete and get started. So if you correlate that to real estate, why would you want to limit the smaller companies from having a fair opportunity to compete? Because one thing a smaller company can do, they can change policies quicker, They can give more individualized attention to their agents. They can have more of a family atmosphere, and they probably don't have the cost and attrition of hiring and having people fall by the wayside. I know when I owned my companies, no, I did have one that was a Century 21 franchise, but I took pride in being very selective in who I hired and having most of my agents be successful and having most of my agents not leave my employ. When I sold my Century 21 back in the early 2000s, I had about 50 agents, and I had very few that left, and almost all my agents were making a pretty decent living. So I took a lot of pride in that, because if I promised agents something, I wanted to fulfill the promises. And by the same token, when I promise consumers things, I want to make sure that I do those things, and I want to position the consumer in the best way possible. Now, a couple of the companies that have gotten more notoriety over trying to cancel out this clear cooperation policy, the company that stands out is Compass Real Estate. Compass is a very large company. They're technologically driven, and they've grown quite a bit over the years. I have nothing bad to say about their growth or success. They pride themselves on having quality agents. They were very aggressive in recruiting. They used to give out sign-on bonuses to agents that had a certain production level. I don't know if they're still doing that or not. They did get some negative publicity about that also from agents that had to pay back the bonuses if certain things didn't happen. But I was not personally involved in that, so I can't give a critique of that policy. I do know that Compass has been very outspoken in trying to revoke this clear cooperation. Their CEO has been very outspoken and talks about this on an ongoing basis. Also, there's another large entity recently, Howard Hanna Real Estate, that came out with a policy that's basically stating they're not in agreement with this policy, and they're going to give their individual offices the autonomy and authority to decide if they want to put their listings in the MLS. So we'll see how this occurs. I personally feel there's never a perfect policy, but I think to make a level playing field and to give the consumers the best opportunity to sell their house for the highest price in the shortest time frame, that the clear cooperation policy should stay in existence. There are a lot of things that the National Association of Realtors has done over the years that I'm not a big fan of, but this one particular policy, I think, is a policy that should stay in place. So I hope that's given some of my listeners a little bit more insight into the dynamics of the politics in real estate. Anytime you have a industry with a lot of commission people, where they're not guaranteed an income in most cases, and where the average agent struggles to make a living, money is always at the forefront of every conversation. And of course, with these larger entities, they have larger overhead, so they have to generate a certain return on investment to justify the office's long-term viability. So it's a policy that you should keep an eye on. As things change with that, I will bring it to your attention as time goes on. Also, I did want to have a follow-up to our last podcast, giving you an update on the NBA playoffs. Right now, that the conference finals have started. In the West, it's the Oklahoma City Thunder against Minnesota Timberwolves. When I gave my NBA predictions on my last podcast, I picked Oklahoma City to play against Indiana in the finals, with Oklahoma City becoming the eventual champion. The first two games, Oklahoma City, they won in dominant fashion. They were both home games. So it's crucial for Minnesota that they win Game 3, which will be tomorrow night. I think this series will last 5 or 6 games, and I do think Oklahoma City will definitely win. In the Eastern Conference, it was Indiana against the New York Knickerbockers. The series started in New York. For about the first 44 minutes of the game, the Knicks were in dominant fashion. They were like 15 points up with 4 minutes to go. I think they were like 9 or 10 points up with about a minute and a half to go. And believe it or not, the Knicks lost in overtime. It was one of the greatest, what we call choke jobs in the history of the NBA. Even though basketball, you can score fairly quickly, there's no way that a team should have lost a lead like that with so limited time left. I thought it was a combination of things. Indiana had one of their players, Aaron Naismith, got very hot and made a bunch of three-pointers. The Knicks' defense was kind of lackadaisical. And I thought in general, the team's coaching staff, for whatever reason, could not get the players to look at it in a more urgent fashion. This was a critical loss for the Knicks. Tonight they're playing in Game 2. If the Knicks don't win tonight, the series is over, because if you lose 2 games at your home court to start the series, you're not going to win. But I think this loss the other night was very devastating, and I think it just furthers my contention that the Indiana Pacers will prevail in this series and face Oklahoma in the finals. That's all for today. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Stay cool. The temperature is very hot, so make sure you take plenty of liquids. If you exercise, keep yourself hydrated. And this is Marty Kaiser out.